A new report from Stats Canada is saying that of all the condos in Ontario, 40% of them are owned by investors. When I first saw this headline, my initial reaction was actually that I thought the number would be higher. Now, there's obviously a lot to unpack here, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to go over exactly what this report said, and we're going to show all of Canada, not just Ontario, of what percentage of condos is owned by investors. My name is Tom Storey, and welcome back to this YouTube channel. I'm a real estate agent here in the city of Toronto, and I make educational content about the Toronto market and really all of Canada, depending on what we are talking about. Thanks so much for being here. If you learned anything in this video, all I ask is you hit that thumbs up button and join our growing community. We're on the way to 10,000 subscribers. You've been growing every single week, and thank you for being here. Also, if you want to book an appointment with me, you can go into the first link in the description and do that at a time that works for you. Okay, so there's obviously a lot to unpack here. Now, 40% of condos owned in Ontario are owned by investors. Okay, so let's just think about that. So I own a condo that I don't live in. I am part of that 40%. We have many clients that have bought investment properties that they do not live in. Now, does that make us bad people? Well, I don't think so, but I think some people think so, and I'll leave that up to you in the comments. Let me know, is this number an issue, or does this number kind of make sense to you? You know, I think when you look at these numbers, it's kind of the reality of the market, and when we really break it down, I guess the question is why? Why has this happened? Why have investors bought up so much real estate? And I think wealth creation would be the first one. You could agree or disagree with buying real estate if it's a good investment, but it's kind of hard to argue with the numbers in markets like Toronto over the last 20, 30 years. The increases that we have seen, that if you've owned a piece of real estate, you have built a ton of equity over that time. The second one would be just the condo boom that we've seen, right? Last year for the actual city of Toronto, over 60% of all the properties that sold were condos. So condos give you this somewhat affordable way to get into the market that didn't previously exist before we started building up. And the third thing that I think we have to acknowledge is that there is a large portion of the population that rents. And they either rent because it's a lifestyle choice, they're just not interested in buying, and that's totally fine. They rent because they can't afford to get into the market, or they're new to a city and they just don't know exactly where they want to live, so they're going to rent for the first year. But where's that rental inventory going to come from? So growing up for me, when I heard the word apartment building, I would typically think as a kind of older building, right? It was owned by one management company. They probably didn't have a dishwasher, didn't have air conditioning, or had a window unit or something like that. That's what I thought of as apartment building. Now, these were purpose-built rentals, but they were built a long time ago. And you didn't typically think apartment building and think something that was brand new. I think that is part of the problem, is that we have been relying on small-time landlords and developers selling properties to small-time landlords to service the amount of rental demand that we have. Now, again, that's a whole nother video on its own. How did that actually happen? But it's something that has happened where a lot of people want to rent. And these landlords, these investors that own the properties, they are at least giving someone an opportunity to rent that property. Just before we go any further, I'd love to know in the comments just how you feel about this in general. Now that the numbers are clear from Stats Canada, that's over 40%. How does that make you feel about the condo market? My good friend Steve Karish did a video on this as well, even though I don't like giving him credit for anything. And he made a really good point that if an investor buys a property, they are buying a property, right? So they are creating demand. They are creating one more demand. But if a typical homeowner sells a property to move into another property, they create one listing and they create one buy. But an investor is just creating the demand without giving anything else back to the market. And that's obviously a reason why you've seen price growth, because people are interested in creates demand, and that's pushed the prices up along with historically low interest rates until the beginning of 2022. All right, let's jump into the article here and go through what it is saying. Okay, so over 40% of Ontario condos were owned by investors in 2020. I don't think that number would be any different today, if not maybe slightly higher. Here's the chart that really caught my attention, okay? So what we're looking at here is British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So they've broken this up into 4 different categories of ownership. So let's start with Ontario. 22.4% were in-province investors, okay? Out-of-province investors were 0.6%. Non-resident investors, meaning foreign buyers, which obviously that's not going to be a thing moving forward, at least for the next 2 years, representing 5.6%. And then 13.4% was called business. Now, when they say business, I'm thinking they're talking about people that own under corporations. These are still investors. Let's call it what it is. So you add all of these up and it gives us over 41% of all of Ontario condos being owned by someone that doesn't actually live in that property. Now, this is not just an Ontario issue, right? Like obviously Ontario is the highest, but BC is just over 35%. You got almost 30% in Manitoba. New Brunswick, just under 25%. And Nova Scotia, you're over 35% as well. All the regulations that have come into the real estate industry, whether it is now banning of the foreign buyers, whether it is the new speculation tax, whether it is the new vacant home tax, there's all these different things that have come in. But I think if you really break it down here, because most of the, if you want to call this a problem, most of the problem is that people that live in these provinces buy properties in the province that they live in to own as an investment property. And the finger has been pointed at all these different people in terms of what is the issue. But if you break it down, at least for the condo market, the issue is us. The issue is Canadians that live here that look at condos as an investment vehicle. I am one of them. Like I said before, many of my clients are. A lot of you watching own a condo as an investment as well. But if you actually wanted to limit demand, because it seems like the issue is actually us, is you put a cap on how many properties you could actually own in Canada. Now, that's likely never, ever going to happen. But if we're just being honest with each other, that's probably what it would take to actually decrease the demand. The final thing I'll touch on in this video is that we know from Stats Canada that about 33% of the population rents. About 33% owns their property free and clear. They're typically baby boomers that have paid it off over many, many years. And then 33% own a property with a mortgage. So for the 33% that do rent, well, who are they going to rent from? We are slowly starting to see more purpose-built new rental inventory coming to the market. But does it make it any better that it's owned by one corporation versus a landlord? That I'm not so sure about. The landlord might not increase your rent every single year because you're just a good tenant, but you think that big corporation is going to forget that they can increase your rent? I don't think so. Hope you enjoyed that video. Hope you learned something new. If you have any questions, you can put them into the comments below. My name is Tom Storey, and remember, home is where your story begins.